What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Scott Proctor alongside my guy Matt Morris per usual, and we're back with another episode of Simple Question. But this time we'll have more than one because we got a special guest joining us today for the very first time, a senior NHL writer at Yahoo Sports, Justin Cuthbert. Justin, thanks for joining us, my man. How are we doing?
Not a problem. Glad to be on. Fired up for the playoffs. Excited to talk with you fellas.
Yes, sir. It's an exciting time to talk some hockey. I want to start here. I saw you recently, I believe it was on a Yahoo Sports podcast, talking about kind of the product of the NHL as a whole, and really specifically the fact that it has never been better. What did you mean by that? And how do you kind of view the state of the league right now currently as we enter the playoffs?
Well, I do firmly believe that the NHL hasn't been as good as it's been in a long time right now. And I think one of the more interesting things when looking at that is that, you know, NHL for some reason, and Gary Bettman in particular, the commissioner, prides itself on parity, this concept of having every market engaged at all times. What we saw this year was really haves and have-nots, where we had really great teams, 10 or 12 that could realistically win the Stanley Cup, and then 10 or 12 really bad teams. And normally the NHL would look at that being like a nightmare scenario, but I think that leads to great things. That leads to super teams. That leads to great performances. And we saw great performances across the board. I mean, in the NBA, we saw the impact that the Golden State Warriors had when they reached super team status in the last decade or so, where they just made basketball and the viewing experience for the general basketball fan that much more interesting. And I think we've seen that a little bit in the NHL this year with a few teams that have emerged and a few players that have done things that other players in the last 10 years couldn't really dream of. I mean, 1996 has been a common comparison to this year. We've heard, the first since 96, this player did this for the first time since 96, because that was the last time scoring was this good in the NHL. We just saw teams and players take it to the next level because there was a little bit more of a difference between the top and the bottom. And I think that's a good thing, despite what the NHL thinks.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, it's been an amazing year. And I guess one of the first questions you always have to ask when the playoffs are coming around is this going to be the year the Toronto Maple Leafs kind of get out of that slump they've been in and get past the first round of the playoffs since 2004? I know it's a tough matchup going against the Lightning, but does this feel like they got something special going on?
It is a special team. I mean, you got to go further than 1996 to look back at since we've had a team as good as the Maple Leafs in Toronto. Actually, they've never had a team this good in the century plus history. They reached a point total that they never had before, smashed their franchise record by, I think, 10 points in the end. I mean, it was a franchise best season for a franchise that's been around for longer than pretty much all of them, save for maybe the Montreal Canadiens. But the thing is, they're dealing with the greatest team in the salary cap era, which is still the exact same as it was, save for a few exits and a few players that have come on board since. The Tampa Bay Lightning are a different animal. They've got the best goaltender in the league still, even though Igor Shesterkin was the best goaltender in the league this season. They've got one of the best defensemen, one of the best snipers, one of the best point producers, everything that you'd want out of a hockey team or covet on the open market or trade or free agency or whatever. The Lightning already have that. The Lightning are the best team in the NHL that we've seen since they changed the rules. And that is a Herculean problem for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But the Leafs are a very good team. If there's one series that I don't really know what the result is going to be, it's this one. You've got the historical context. You've got the demons that we all talk about in the Toronto market all the time with this team. Like, you really just can't escape the history. But really, it is about these two teams. And if you look at these two teams and forget all that, Toronto might be a little bit better. But it's a psychological hurdle as much as it is a hurdle in the form of a two-time Stanley Cup champion. So the task for Toronto, which is unfair given how good they've been, is massive. And I don't know if they're going to be able to survive it. And I don't know what that means for the franchise if they don't.
No doubt about it. That Lightning Leafs series is going to be a barn burner one for sure. One that I think every hockey fan, even if you're not a hockey fan, should be tuned into. I want to ask this question, and you might have just answered it. I might have just, prefaced it a little bit for you. Which first round series, because there's a few of them, like I said, do you think has 7 games written all over? Which series do you think is most likely to go 7 games? And again, it might be that Lightning Maple Leaf series. And if it is, talk a little bit more about that. But what's another series that you envision, going the distance here in the first round?
Yeah, Lightning and Leafs is a possibility for sure. I do see several potential outcomes there, but one series that seems like it's got 7 written all over it is the Minnesota Wild and St. Louis Blues. They've been the best 2 teams since the trade deadline, so that's going back about 6 weeks. I think combined, we're about 36-2. Just a ridiculous point pace for both of them. And neither of those teams were able to really gain any ground on each other because they won the exact same amount of games over that stretch. But they did play each other a few times, and St. Louis got the better of Minnesota. Minnesota does have home ice advantage. It has 2 goaltenders compared to St. Louis's 1, but that doesn't really matter in a playoff series because you only generally see one unless you run into issues. It's one really deep team in St. Louis versus one really structured team with great goaltending in Minnesota. I could see that one going down to the wire. And if I was to pick, I think I'd go St. Louis because they have the depth. And when it comes down to a series that is decided at the margins, like this one might be, which team is going to have that goal scorer from that 3rd or 4th line that can make a difference? I tend to believe it's St. Louis. So I think if we're looking at razor close matchups, I think it's Minnesota, St. Louis, and I probably give the edge to St. Louis.
Can't wait to see that one.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. And I mean, you talked about it. You may have already, just like Scott said, you may have already answered it as far as kind of showing what you expect out of this first round. But one of the teams that I'm looking at is like Washington with Ovechkin. Do you think Ovechkin has a chance of like leading this team and putting on some sort of Herculean, game and series to at least give them a chance?
Well, they're against Florida, and it's way, way more difficult against Florida. Florida, we're talking about since 96. Well, they're the highest scoring team since 1996. They're a team that's averaging over 4 goals per game. That's something we generally have not seen. I think there's been only a few, in the recent history of the National Hockey League. Yep. Florida has the depth that I don't think Washington could match. Florida is just every line, shift over shift, just relentless aggression and attack-minded focus from that team. They won the President's Trophy based on merit. They had to beat out the Colorado Avalanche, one of the best teams we've seen in recent memory here. In order to do that, this Florida team is legit. And Washington's only 4 years removed from winning the Stanley Cup. But in the last couple postseasons since that Stanley Cup, we've seen them kind of get pushed to the brink a little bit and then maybe decide, hey, I don't know if we have it this year. They haven't necessarily shown that dig-in capability since that Stanley Cup. I don't know if they're a little since maybe just not as talented. There was an aging team that won in 2018 and now it's 4 years later. I just don't think they are as youthful, fresh, and hungry as a team like the Florida Panthers would be. And I think I mentioned, the difference between haves and have-nots. I'm not really sure Washington is a have, despite having 100 plus points this year. I think the reason why they got to that total is because everyone below them is pretty bad and they just feasted on lesser competition, and they kind of maybe have a paper tiger sort of situation forming where they're a team that looks great on paper, won 4 years ago, 100 points, but isn't nearly as strong as a Florida team.
Gotcha.
Justin, you mentioned at the top that there's 10 or 12, really, really strong teams in the league right now. You mentioned obviously the haves and have-nots. Give me a dark horse, a team that, isn't, Tampa, Colorado, Florida, one of these favorites that, you wouldn't be surprised at all if they ended up somehow, making a deep run, ended up in a Stanley Cup final.
New York jumped into my head for the sole reason that they have maybe the most powerful single force in the league this year, being their goaltender, Igor Shesterkin. I mean, goaltending, listen, we talk about the Leafs. If they just don't have even remotely adequate goaltending, then everything that they built this year doesn't really matter, right? So that can work in both ways. You can have a goaltender that can cover up for flaws in your team, and that's what Igor Shesterkin on his path to winning the Vezina Trophy, at least we presume, has done for New York all season. Like, this isn't a great team from shift to shift in terms of performance. If you look at advanced metrics and expected goals and all that stuff, they kind of lag behind, but they have the best save percentage in the NHL behind the best goaltender or performing goaltender in the NHL right now. And that can be a very, very powerful thing in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So they could go on a run. They got Pittsburgh first. Pittsburgh's a team that's like Washington, kind of fading in terms of their relevance. And in the Western Conference, I might go the Calgary Flames. I mean, this is like the Kings of 2012 and 2014 reincarnate. They are so well coached. They play so disciplined. They play heavy. They might be able to give a team like Colorado some fits because they got the goaltending, they got the coaching, and they play a very simplistic, repeatable style. So Calgary and New York are two teams in terms of, maybe not blowing our socks off with their performance all year, but could potentially do damage in the playoffs.
Yeah, so we talked dark horses. I mean, who at the end of the day, Justin, do you think is going to end up, lifting that Stanley Cup and winning it all?
I'd probably say it's the Colorado Avalanches to lose. They are an exceptional team, immensely talented, and they have been through some past disappointment here, not getting past the second round in the last few seasons when they've had variable Stanley Cup contenders. It burns pretty bad for that team right now. They've been waiting for this moment, and they understand the consequence of not winning this year because they have a lot of pending unrestricted free agents that are going to go get paid elsewhere. So they've got a great core that has been to this point mostly underpaid, and that's an important thing to have lesser paid superstars, and their time is running out. And I feel like this is the year they get it done. They have all the talent to do it. They've got not the easiest path, but not the hardest path because they don't have to go through the Eastern Conference and the Atlantic Division, specifically in Tampa, Toronto, and Florida. So if I had to put money somewhere, it'd be Colorado. And what makes the most sense is probably the Avalanche as well.
Mm-hmm. The Avs have been humming. I like that pick a lot. And you mentioned putting your money somewhere, Justin. I saw you recently, kind of tweet out, some of your favorite props for the playoffs. For our gambling folks, I know Matt and I dabble just a little bit. For our gambling folks, give me a couple props that you really like here in the first round. In terms of again gambling that you really like that you think are going to hit.
Well, we'll stick with Colorado. I like the under 5.5 games. I got it at -120. That means they could win in either 4 and 5, and you win the bet. And if Nashville somehow upsets them in 5 games or 4 games, then I guess you'd win that as well. But instead of guessing between 4 and 5, I say, as I mentioned, this team being so hungry, so desperate, they're not going to play with their food, I don't think, at this point. And letting Nashville hang around in 6 games would be akin to playing with their food. Nashville doesn't have its superstar goaltender, so it should be over pretty quickly there. Rangers and Bruins are plus money, or were plus money when I got them in the Metropolitan Division. The Rangers would have to beat the Penguins. And of course, Boston is playing Carolina. I like those two as dogs or slight dogs. And one that I think for Tampa, Toronto, since we started with that and then we got to this point now, Tampa in 7, I think was plus 520. And if we're talking win conditions in a competitive series, Tampa doesn't lose one-off elimination games. They just don't. Andrei Vasilevsky, their goaltender, doesn't even allow goals in those games. I think he's a perfect 5-0 when facing elimination with 5 straight shutouts. When they have their backs up against the wall, there is no team that is more equipped to win that game. So if it goes 7, which is entirely possible, I don't think the Leafs or Lightning are going to be non-competitive. It's going to be a great series. It will probably go deep. And if it goes deep and the Lightning are in that game and you have a 520, they could be feeling pretty good about it.
Love it. That's awesome stuff, Justin. It's super insightful. Thanks so much for joining us. Go follow Justin's great work on Twitter at Yahoo Sports. But for Scott Proctor, Matt Morris, our guy, Justin Cuthbert, catch you on the next episode of Simple Question.